It's a stream, Colleen.
What?
It's a stream.
Woo!
I'm streaming.
You're streaming.
To the entire universe. Everyone ever is gonna watch. It's gonna be great. You know? How do I get to chat? Da-da-da-da. Gotta add some tags. Frame animation. Animation. Live art. Live animation. Bingleheimer. Drawing. Live drawing. How to draw. Drawing stream. Animation stream. Art stream. Art streamer. What else? Photoshop. YouTube tags. Stream of consciousness. Morph animation. Trippy shit. So many things. Good enough. You guys can hear me do dishes. Okay. Apparently I cannot turn on music because it'll ruin my stream and get flagged. And then, you know, then I'm screwed. Alright, let's see, what do we have? Got this face morphing into what looks like a Mario Kart map. They go through the train tunnel. Trippy stuff. But it looks like it's turning into a castle. Post it to the shit. Post it to the other shit in Discord. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. How do I computer? How do I internet? Twitch says I'm playing League of Legends. Nah, son. Nah. Art. Or creative. Art. English tag? What the hell? Animation. Digital art. What else? What am I doing? Drawing. That's a thing. No music, like a goddamn weirdo. Ask me anything. That has never worked. Maybe it'll work this time. I don't care. Ask me anything. Alright, how do I share this? Where is the goddamn share button? Share link to channel. Nice. Copy. Copy this sweet play-by-play. How about my WoW guild? Do it to the other one. How many followers? 39. Alright. I did it. I'm a real boy now. I'm a real kid now. Alright. I wish I had a playlist that would not get flagged. That would be great. Could just ramble until I run out of air. That doesn't seem productive. Trying to draw as quickly as I can and not really make it representational. Like, just let my psyche morph it into whatever it wants. So I can analyze how things move, but I don't want it to be something specific. Even though right now it's definitely a castle. Gonna switch it up. I also don't want to analyze every line to be perfect, because who gives a damn? Doesn't matter. It's gonna happen so quickly you won't even notice. It's like 12 drawings a second. So you're not gonna like see this tiny line. It will not matter. Alright, got lots of clouds back here. Lots of blobs. Let's take a look. What do we have? One second. Let me draw this. What do we got? Who knows? Trippy stuff. Just deconstructing shapes. I'm not trying to be anything at all. Just doodling. Alright, I changed my mind. I'm gonna listen to what I was listening to before, which is weird stuff.
Evolved on the African veldt, and now our nervous system is sort of adapted for that primordial environment and not really for the modern environment. And so there's a mismatch between us and the modern world. It's like, I think that's an absolutely reprehensible theory, partly because we didn't just evolve on the veldt. We've been evolving for a very long time. We spent a lot more time in trees, for example, than we did on the veldt. And while we were spending time in trees, a lot of us were eaten by snakes, for example. And so that's another reason why the unknown itself is represented as this terrible, predatory, reptilian beast. And then the human being is represented as that which, or the conscious element of the human being, which was represented by the Mesopotamians as a god. The highest god, actually, in the hierarchy of gods, which was a brilliant Mesopotamian realization, because the Mesopotamians basically concluded in their drama, their religious drama, that the highest faculty of the human being was the capacity to consciously attend to the unknown and to make something new out of it. Well, that's a Piagetian idea, right? That's exactly what Piaget was talking about when he talked about the necessity of comprehending knowledge as a process rather than as a collection of facts. It's a process. What's the process? Confront what you don't understand. boldly go where no one has ever gone, right? I mean, Star Trek, that's where
Star Trek.
systematizing minds get their mythology. You know, it's rife with mythology, and its initial statement is a mythological statement, and it's a statement of the eternal explorer. And that's an archetypal idea. And, you know, you might say, well, are you still threatened by those terrible things that threatened your ancestors on the veldt? Normally people would say, well, no, because there are no lions. But that's because they don't get the categories right. Lion is a subcategory of unknown horrible thing. And you guys are surrounded by unknown horrible things just like people have always been surrounded by unknown horrible things. So, because you're just as prone to disease, not quite as prone, but fundamentally you're a finite being. And there's things everywhere that act in a predatory manner in relationship to you, and you will die. And so the idea that the material conditions of our environment have changed in a qualitative manner since the time we spent on the veldt it's an error of category. The mythological categories are categories that represent environmental entities, so to speak, some of which are social, that have existed for vast stretches of time and which exceed our capacity to detect with our senses. So one representation, for example, is the Great Father, or the Wise Old Man. And the Wise Old Man, or the Great Father, is fundamentally a representation of the dominance hierarchy. Now, the problem with the dominance hierarchy is you can't see it, but it's there. It's really there. And then figures like the Great Mother, especially the tarot, because most of the archetypal figures come in pairs, a positive element and a negative element, and that's because virtually everything that manifests itself to you in a complex environment, if you're a living being, takes with one hand and gives with the other. You know, so nature is benevolent and kind and wise and the source of all new knowledge, and also cancer and malarial mosquitoes and the tsetse fly and the guinea worm and all these things that are horrifying and destructive beyond belief, and you're stuck with both. And then society, we talked about this before, that's the Great Father. It's on the one hand, here you are, benevolently protected by your social surround. On the other hand, social structures tend towards tyranny and authoritarianism, and they oppress the individuals within them at the same time that they sustain their development. And so that's a dichotomous archetype. And then there's the individual, who's on the one hand a remarkable and wonderful creature, and on the other hand someone who's capable of atrocities like those that characterized the actions of many millions of people in the 20th century. Those are all archetypes. There are more archetypes than that. Like the archetype of the predatory reptile with something to offer, which is essentially a dragon, is the most fundamental archetypal representation. Jung found that representation in alchemical manuscripts, mostly in the form of the Ouroboros, which is a snake that eats its own tail. And it's a symbol of matter and spirit in union, because the snake is sort of matter, and the wings on the snake, the dragon, make it spirit. So it's like the fundamental elements of reality are matter and spirit in some kind of conjoined state.
Will it work this time?
The fundamental task of the human being is to come to terms with the nature of that unknown thing. Now, think about it this way. Well, why would ancient people represent the unknown as such, as a reptilian, self-contained reptilian form that was both spiritual and material? Well, here's the reason. First, the unknown's dangerous, and you could be its prey. So you better have that representation at hand. And then you might ask, well, is that really the unknown? And then I would say, well, it depends absolutely on what you mean by really. From a Darwinian perspective, that was the best way to conceptualize the unknown. And then you might say, well, that doesn't make it real. And then I might say, are you sure about that? Is there anything more real than representations derived from Darwinian processes? The Darwinists would say no. Okay, so why is it matter and spirit? Why is it winged and on the ground at the same time? Well, you can also understand this from a Piagetian perspective. And so that is because when you encounter the unknown, you separate the material world and the spiritual world. And the spiritual world is the psychological world. And so what you're doing when you encounter the unknown is you parse some of it up into the world, and you incorporate other elements of it into yourself. And the best way to think about that, I think, from a conceptual perspective, so it becomes more understandable, is that what you encounter when you encounter the unknown is patterned information. And you take some of that patterned information into yourself, even by doing something as simple as gripping something you want to pick up, because you're imitating the pattern of the thing that you want to pick up. And that's how you're transforming its structure into an element of your being. And so when you're exploring the unknown, it's a constructivist idea, you're simultaneously constructing the world and constructing yourself. And thus, the inference is the unknown is made out of that which can be parsed out into psyche and matter. And it's dangerous. So it's a perfectly reasonable representation. And that's why it won't go away. So Jung's fundamental contribution, I would say, is his analysis of hero mythology. And I would say that's the fundamental element of his thinking. Now, the relationship between that and Nietzsche is fundamentally this. Nietzsche believed that once the religious systems collapsed, we would have to consciously produce our new set of values. But Jung believed that the psyche was the source of all value. And so that it wasn't a matter of creating new values, it was a matter of discovering the values that were already lying dormant and implicit within us. So, and the next thing I would say about that is,
Sure.
you all know this.
This is not exciting.
You just
to
don't
listen
know
to.
you know it. And
But
so one of the reasons to be
I like to
be
learn.
educated from a literary and historical
Well, I work.
perspective is that you can come to understand
Some-
what you already know.
Feel free
Because
to
if
mute
you
me.
don't understand it, then
Kinda
there's
like
an element
Sunday
of your
school.
being, the element that knows it and acts it out, and there's another element which is sort of you
Sunday
as a
school,
personality that are
philosophy,
completely at odds with one another. And that makes you weak.
Psychoanalogy.
It makes you something that's divided within
It's
itself.
fun.
Now, you're doing everything you can as a general rule to incorporate this information. Now, for a long time, it seems as if as long as we acted it out and represented it symbolically and didn't argue about the assumptions, it was more or less okay. But we're past that now. And in order for us to benefit from the same protective structures that our ancestors benefited from, we now have to understand what they mean consciously. And that's really what Jung was up to. What he was really trying to do was to resurrect deep religious representations from the dead, so to speak, and to make them conscious so people could align themselves with them again. Now, I'm going to show you something that's related to that. All right, now, so I'm going to show you something from Pinocchio. Now, this is an initiation ritual. It's a journey to the depths, so it's a journey to the underworld. It's the consequence of a collapse in previous personality and the disintegration of that previous personality into a chaotic state prior to rebirth. Now, what happens in Pinocchio, which, by the way, was released at about the same time that World War II was brewing, and which also contains one of the best representations of the individual motivations for fascism that I've ever seen anywhere. That's the scenes that are associated with Pleasure Island. Remember, all the puppet is trying to become a real boy, right? So he's a marionette to begin with. Something else is pulling his strings. Well, for Jung, that's your habitual state of being. Something else is pulling your strings. Even the idea that you're autonomous is the consequence of something else pulling your strings. And for Jung, what you needed to do was find out exactly who and what is pulling your strings and decide if that's the direction in which you want to go. And that's really what happens to Pinocchio, because we're going to watch Pinocchio, part of it, in the Pinocchio story. He starts out as a marionette. Now, he's a marionette made by a good father, because Geppetto was a good father. He's a good craftsman and so on. So he's a marionette with a benevolent puppeteer. But as soon as he develops some autonomy, then he becomes prey to forces that are elements of the demonic archetype. In fact, the worst bad guy in the entire movie turns into Satan himself at one point in the movie. He basically has horns and a bright red face, and he manifests himself as so terrifying that the coyote, wolf, fox, and the cat that are trying to corrupt Pinocchio are terrified because they get, like, they're criminals, they're petty criminals and deceptive and so forth, but when they get a look at who's pulling their strings, it's enough to terrify them. And so Pinocchio goes through a series of temptations of various sorts, including a Freudian temptation, and the Freudian temptation is to remain weak and sickly instead of becoming a real person, so it's an Oedipal problem. And another problem that faces Pinocchio is that he's offered false celebrity as a way of solving his life's problems, so he's offered the opportunity to become an actor, and what that means is a deceitful fake who's constructed a persona that makes him appear far more valuable than he really is. So the movie outlines two pathological modes of movement towards maturity, one being a phony, and the other taking the easy way out and hyper valuing all your pathology so that you become dependent. So anyways, and then another mode of pathological development is offered to Pinocchio, which is to do nothing but engage in short-term impulsive and destructive play, and that's on Treasure Island. But when he goes to Pleasure Island, he finds that it's actually ruled by demonic forces with faceless entities who are transforming all the pleasure-seeking marionettes to braying donkeys who are slaves. So Pinocchio escapes from that, and he does it basically by jumping into the unknown, and that's where we're going to start our exposure to his initiation. Okay, so now you can imagine what's happened is he was on Pleasure Island and everything went to hell fundamentally. And so he jumped into the water to escape from that, and that's equivalent to plunging into chaos. And so chaos was an escape from pathological tyranny. And now he's tried to go home. So this is the psyche in its search for maturation runs into an obstacle, which is the tyrannical element of the Great Father that it cannot cope with, and it trots home. Runs home. It's a defeat. Typical part of a hero story is the initial defeat of the hero when he encounters usually either the terrible Great Father or the terrible Great Mother. So this is a retrogressive, Jung would call this retrogressive restoration of the persona. So it's sort of like maybe you're a well-adapted adolescent and you live at home, and you're a happy adolescent and everything's good at home. And then you go out to try to be an adult and you fail. And then when you come back home, you try to act like a happy adolescent again. But you're not. What you are, in fact, is an unhappy adult. And if you move back to the happy adolescent mode of being, then it's false and pathological. You can't go home again. Another typical motif in literature. Now, the cricket, I can't tell you everything about this story. I can tell you a couple of strange things about it. One is that the cricket is Jiminy Cricket, right? And the initials of Jiminy Cricket are JC. And Jiminy Cricket was a common Southern American mild form of cursing. It's the equivalent of Jesus Christ. And so you might think, and of course, the cricket is Pinocchio's conscience, and also then you might ask yourself, why in the world would a
You need to rewatch Pinocchio.
mildly pejorative term for Jesus Christ be applied to a cricket who's guiding a puppet into the water to rescue his father from a whale? Why would any of that happen? And the answer to that is, you know why, but you can't say why. You can't say why you know, or what it is that you know. But the mere fact that it makes sense, and it does, is an indication from a Jungian perspective that you're operating at an archetypal level. You understand this. And so I could say, here's an example of why the cricket is a bug. Well, things bug you, right? We say that, things bug me. Well, you should do something about the things that bug you, because that's your conscience calling to you. It's destiny in some sense manifesting itself as an unconscious impulse. That really bugs me. Means if you can, you should do something about it, because you think about it, man. There's a lot of things out there that might bug you, but lots of them don't. But some of them do. Well, why do those bug you and not the other things? Well, that's a complicated question, but one potential answer to it is that there's part of your psyche that's oriented towards further development. Jung would call that the self. And that's like the totality of everything that you could be. And it's a strange sort of entity in some sense, because it's partly potential, and it's potential that expands across time. But the way that your potential totality calls to you in the present is by placing things in front of you that are your problem. And they announce themselves as your problem. And they do that by bothering you.
It's not serious.
Huh?
It's not serious.
So then if you pick up the task
Yeah.
of fixing the things that bothers you, then you find the pathway
I
to
read some
further
of it.
expansion of your
What?
personality.
I read some of it.
So, and that's what's happening with Pinocchio. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about the Pinocchio movie that makes it incredibly sophisticated is that despite the fact that the cricket is a avatar of Christ, so to speak, the cricket has things to learn just like Pinocchio. And so that's very cool, because it's so cool, it's so sophisticated, because it means that you do have a conscience that guides you. But until you establish a dialogue with it, both you and the conscience are immature. You have to establish a conscious dialogue with it, and then interact together in a manner that propels your development across time. And that'll stop you from being a marionette of forces that would make you a braying donkey who does nothing but slave away in salt mines. So, okay, so Pinocchio goes home. That doesn't work, and that's where we're going to start here.
Going back to Jordan Peterson's page, YouTube, and rewatching his lectures from the beginning. So this is his 2015 personality class, Depth Psychology, Carl Jung, Part 1.
Okay, so what's happened there? Well, many, many things at multiple levels of reality simultaneously. And that's the characteristic of an archetypal story. So on one level, Pinocchio's too old to go home. He can't go home to his father because in some sense he's already transcended his father. So there are things, for example, that your father can't help you with, and the reason for that is that he doesn't know any more about the situation than you do, and he can't. And so that's where his knowledge limits out. So that would be sort of on the personal level. And then on the transpersonal level, which would be the deeper archetypal level, what's happening to Pinocchio is exactly what Nietzsche described at the end of the 19th century. So remember that Geppetto is his creator, and now he's dead, he's gone. And so Pinocchio is bereft of placement, so to speak. His soul has been corrupted, and he doesn't know what to do about it. And when he returns to his family home, or when he returns to his tradition, what he finds is nothing. Okay, so then what happens? Well, this is another thing that you'll swallow with just no problem whatsoever. Well, this dove comes along that's sort of golden and glowing and drops a note right in front of him. Now, you may remember, and perhaps you don't, but the star from which the dove comes is a representation of the blue fairy. And the blue fairy is the positive element of the unknown in Pinocchio movie. And so what it basically is saying that when you're despairing because your father has died and your tradition has nothing to offer, that the positive element of the unknown may provide you with a message about where to go if you pay enough attention. That would be an intuition.
What?
Or it would be the automatic attraction of your interest to a new thing by forces that you do not understand. So one of the real ways of coming to grips with the idea of the active unconscious is to understand that you cannot control what you're interested in. And so then you might ask, well, if it's not you, what is it? And if you think about that problem long enough, you'll start to understand what Jung was talking about, because that is the way that you can understand in your own life that the things that direct you as a being are not things that you consciously choose. In fact, they're not even things that you can consciously choose. They're directed by other forces. So anyways, the dove drops a message in front of Pinocchio and the cricket. Now it's the cricket that breeds it, so it's the same idea as what bugs you, so to speak. The cricket is an interpreter. Okay, so now what have we found out? Well, we found out that God the Father and God the Father, the Creator, are not in fact dead, which is what Nietzsche pronounced, but alive in some weird way in this horrible creature at the bottom of the ocean. And so what does Pinocchio decide to do? He decides to go find him. That's actually what you're doing at university, by the way. For all the chaos that you experience when you come to university and all the uncertainty and all the doubt, what you're trying to do is to resurrect your dead father from the bottom of the ocean. And if you do that, you won't be a marionette. And if you don't, you will be. Now this is very interesting because the conscience here plays a very dichotomous role. So on the one hand, Pinocchio is often ahead of his conscience, so to speak, so he's taking the leading role, and the dialogue is kind of choppy and neither of them know exactly what they're doing. But in this situation, it's very paradoxical because you can see Pinocchio's been half turned into brain jackass at this point, something you might well consider when you remember your adolescence. So in this point, the cricket, his conscience, does two things. It warns him how horrible this is going to be and how utterly dangerous it is, and then at the same time, it helps him prepare and goes along with him. And so it's quite comical, so watch what happens here.
Can you move?
Mind if I?
So I've cut this a little bit, but what happens in the movie is that he goes to the bottom of the ocean and he starts to ask about Monstro. And as soon as he asks any of the fish down there, the denizens of the sub-oceanic world, where Monstro is, they just run away. And so Monstro is he who cannot be named, right? And I'm sure you've encountered that in your reading before, right? That's the hallmark of the Harry Potter series. Right, see, now you've done it. Yeah. So this represents something so terrible that it can't even be talked about. Okay, so what happens is Pinocchio ends up not only at the bottom of the ocean, but he has to go to the deepest part of the bottom of the ocean where the most terrible thing rests. And so we're cutting to the point where he does that. So now you might ask, how did Geppetto get in the whale? And the answer to that is it's never really made that clear in the movie. But I can tell you some things about that, is that if you conceptualize your historical tradition as a personality, a body of laws and customs, say, it's not alive. It's dead, right? Because it's composed of the past. And because it's dead, it can't come up with anything new. So if it encounters something new, it's stopped. And that's what's happened to Geppetto, is that he's engulfed by this entity that represents the absolute unknown, and he cannot figure out how to get out. And the reason for that is none of the things he knows, so none of the things that history has produced as a body of knowledge, are sufficient to deal with the fundamental problem. That doesn't mean they're useless. It just means that just like the puppet is lost without the father is also lost without the puppet. And that's the relationship between you and history, your history. When you study history, you think, well, you're studying a record of events in the past, and that's not right. What you're studying is the circumstances that gave rise to you as a being. And unless you understand your history in every way you possibly can, then you're an incomplete creature. You don't know enough to move forward. In the same way, your culture, being composed of dead fathers, so to speak, can't progress without you, because you're its eyes. And there's an Egyptian story that features the god Horus, who I've talked to you about before, who actually resurrects his father from the dead by giving him an eye. So Geppetto can't figure out how to get out of this whale without help. So he's kind of pushing up tombstones there, you might note. All right, now something very sophisticated happens here. So, and I have to explain it to you at multiple levels at the same time. So now, Geppetto is hungry. And when the whale opens its mouth, a lot of fish come in. Now, one of the things I want you to think about, you can just put this in the back of your mind, is that one of the oldest symbolic representations of Christ is a fish. And all of his followers were fishermen. And so there's this weird relationship between the messianic figure who's at the base of it, at least at the base of Christian culture, and the idea of things that are pulled up from the depths. Now here's what happens in this part of the movie.
Hold up. Does Photoshop limit the amount of time you can make? Or do I just need a new layer? Let's see. New video layer. Yep. There we go.
So amazing. So Geppetto is looking for fish, and the reason for that is he doesn't think he can get out of the whale, and so he might as well have some fish while he's in there. So he's given up on getting out. Now what happens is that the whale swallows Pinocchio as if he's a fish. So Pinocchio is put into the same category as fish, and it happens to Geppetto a couple of times. He mistakes Pinocchio for a fish. You'll see. So what that means in some sense is that Geppetto can't distinguish between the fish that will feed you for the day and whatever it is that Pinocchio represents. And so you could think about Pinocchio as a fisherman instead of as a fish. And so you can think about it this way, and here's an old saying: if you give a man a fish, you feed him for one day, but if you teach him to fish, you feed him forever. And so the idea is it's better to develop the skill to acquire something than it is to have the thing. Now, what Pinocchio represents is, he's like a meta fish. I know this is a strange way of thinking about it. Geppetto's problem isn't that he's hungry. His problem is that he can't get out of the whale, and so what he's fishing for isn't something to eat, it's something that will help him get out of the whale. But he can't recognize the difference between the proximate solution, which is so that he'll just no longer be hungry, so he's got a very short-term outlook, and a solution to the much broader problem. So what happens is, the whale swallows a bunch of fish, and Pinocchio's in there, and Geppetto's fishing away, and he catches Pinocchio. And Pinocchio announces himself, and Geppetto tells him to be quiet because he's interfering with him fishing, and then when he turns to hug Pinocchio, because he wakes up, he actually hugs a fish, and then he discards the fish. So then he figures out that Pinocchio's there. Then Geppetto decides that, well, they're going to have to live inside the whale. And it's another idea of his blindness at this point, because he's composed of the dead past, so to speak. So what Pinocchio does is start to destroy the ship itself, which is what they're floating in the whale, to start a fire. And the fire makes the whale mad enough to spit them out, and the whale then transforms itself into a dragon and tries to kill them, because it's a fire-breathing entity at that point. And so part of the understory is, it's better to figure out how to fish than to fish, or that more profoundly, it's better to figure out how to do something than to merely benefit from the thing itself. Pinocchio represents that which can do new things. So he's a hero, and he's willing to destroy part of the current order, that's the ship, in order to produce a new strategy that will actually free them from the whale. Now he wants to get his father out of there too. So that's what happens in the next 5 minutes, I would say.
Oh boy. I need to rewatch this movie. Alright, how long is he gonna watch this movie?
If you braise a lot of, essentially in some sense.
Alright, here we go.
Okay, so now there's a shock here, because essentially in some sense, the entity that's going to provide the solution to this very complex problem has arrived on the scene. But it's quite damaged. First of all, it's been speaking improperly. right? So that's an adolescent representation. So it brays a lot of nonsense. And it's been corrupted in a variety of ways. And so, you know, to some degree what that means is that as you mature and you're moving away from your mere marionette status, your interaction with society, like Rousseau said, corrupts you in all sorts of ways. I mean, you're participating in that corruption, but it still happens. But in the representation of the movie, the truth of the matter is it doesn't matter if you've been corrupted to some degree, as long as you haven't absolutely sacrificed your capacity for true speech and vision. So, you know, that's a pretty hopeful message, because Pinocchio is by no means a perfect entity, but he might be good enough. See, that's also an indication there of why people are often unwilling to form a representation with, so to speak, form a relationship with the archetype of the Great Father, because to some degree the archetype is a figure of perfection, and the individual in relationship to that archetype is always pathologically flawed. And so the embarrassment of that realization, which is exactly what's happening to Pinocchio right now, is often enough to stop people from doing it. So what that would say, what that means in some sense, is that in order for you to mature in the fullest possible manner, you have to understand the manner in which you're deeply flawed in relationship to your potential as it might be historically determined. And that's a very bitter thing to do. You know, it's much easier, and people do this all the time, to engage in half-witted, formulaic, ideological criticisms of the system as a whole. It's like, you know, the probability that the system is more flawed than you is pretty damn low. So you might want to start with, you know, getting rid of your donkey ears and your tail and stop braying nonsense before you judge the entire, you know, historical process by which human beings have come into being. So, anyways, that's kind of what that means. Fire. Well, okay, so this is very interesting too, because, so Pinocchio ends up being a master of fire. Well, you can think about that as, there is a book written a while back by an anthropologist who also wrote Demonic Males, Richard Wrangham, and he talked about the origin of fire. And as far as Wrangham is concerned, we invented fire about 2 million years ago, and that enabled us to cook food, and that enabled us to swap intestinal length for brain. So if you look at a chimpanzee, you know, chimpanzees are like the ultimate in couch potatoes, right? They're about this high and they're shaped like this. They have this huge barrel body. And the reason they have that is because they eat leaves. And so they have to spend like 8 hours a day eating leaves. They will eat meat if they can get it. They have to spend like 8 hours a day eating leaves and just chewing them over and over, because like leaves, A, they don't want to be eaten, so they're pretty tough and inedible, and B, they don't have any nutritive quality to speak of. So the chimpanzee has to spend all of its time chewing, which is a rather mindless endeavor, all things considered. Whereas human beings, 2 million years ago or thereabouts, invented fire, and as a consequence of that, we could cook meat, and meat is incredibly energy rich. And so, and it's easy to digest once it's cooked. And so the consequence of the invention of fire was that we're the way we are today. We can have a brain instead of a gut. And so the idea that Pinocchio's mastery of fire, and it's as something more than merely a means of cooking. That's how it started out, right? But you can think of our entire technological capacity as stemming from the mastery of fire. Now, the other thing you can think of, and this is very much worth considering, is that Pinocchio masters fire, and that turns the whale into a dragon. And so the idea there, too, is that, and this is an old idea, is that our technological prowess is something that makes nature itself angry. And of course you might say, well, do you believe this? And the answer to that is, well, how many of you have environmentalist leanings? And that's exactly the story that you're following. Because you're still wondering about whether or not mastery of fire was in somehow against the natural order, and that it will end up in all of our deaths. And you know, that's a reasonable thing to worry about, but not mastering it was going to end up pretty badly too. So
YouTube ads.
When I was born in the colony of
What the hell? Oh boy. It's already 1 o'clock.
is that in the mid So here what happens is that in the midst of this complete chaos, Pinocchio has a choice, and the choice is he can either save himself, which is a very, very selfish choice, and reduces him to an ahistorical individual because he has no relationship left with his father, or he can put himself at great risk and rescue his father, you know, finish the process, stop his father from drowning, and complete the story. Okay, so Pinocchio dies, and then his father brings him home. And so because he's rescued his father, the benevolent spirit of nature appears, resurrects him, and turns him into a real human being. So it's pretty funny, as far as I'm concerned, that the answer to Nietzsche's great question manifested itself in mid-1930s in the form of an animated child's movie. So, you know, and that's an example. It's an example of a number of things. It's an example of how archetypes work. It's also an example of how artists are on the edge of discovery all the time, and they discover things they don't even understand. So, we'll see you next Tuesday.
I mean, pretty much sums up what I'm doing right now. Just drawing in attempts to discover myself. So, Jim Tendo, what's up, man? How you been? I don't think you missed much. I'll show you after I finish this picture. Which should not take long. Uno momento. Picked up guitar and keep forgetting to animate, neither of which I'm very good at. Practice makes perfect. You'll get there. Is it an electric guitar or an acoustic? I also play guitar. I don't know if my mic is loud enough. Looks like it's pretty quiet. Alright, what do we got? We got onion layers, onion skins. Horn hubs. Fanfic of UB when? Horn hubs. What kind of name is that? But I know you're from WoW, because you're mentioning UB. Probably you're UB. Unbranded. This is for you, since it is not branded at all. It's just trippy stuff. Makes me think of the Mario Kart map in the desert. You bet. It is you. Jim Tendo Man, acoustic, but I'm learning electric with my father. That's so cool. Thanks. I learned guitar from my brother. Maybe it's a family thing. Maybe it's good if it's family. Hold up, I'll grab my guitar. Play you guys a diddly. Because why not? Alright, this one goes out to Jim Tendo Man and Unbranded. Ooh. That's all I got. Oh, this one. Wash hands, wash hands, wash hands. What is that? I feel like that's an emoji. Is that a clap? I feel like you meant it to be a clap, but it's a wash hands. Sweet. Thanks. Dun, dun, dun. Why are people watching now that I'm not even drawing? That's fucked up. Some funky shit. Slamming doors. Thanks. Jim Tyndall likes it. Musical doodling is kind of like drawing. Physical doodling. Just flowing with ideas. I made you want to play guitar. Alright. My job here is done. Practice those scales, Jim Tyndall. It's all about scales. I like that one. Or let's try that again. Good luck, Jim Tyndall. I hope you slay those eardrums. Alright, what was I doing? Ooh. Trippy shit. Alright. One more drawing, and then I'll hop off. Because the first is on Tuesday. And that's when I upload new animations. First of every month. Oof. Oh goddamn. How do I draw? Now my hands are all jittery after playing guitar. I'm all hyped. Oh god. Shit. That's not what I wanted. Maybe I should just be a guitar stream. Here's my daily lick of the day. Thanks for the follow, UB. I think I'm at 40 now. God damn. Slowly growing. Alright. Just kidding. Looks like I forgot to draw that window. I feel like this one should not grow as much. Alright, let's take a look. What do we got? Some trippy fucking shit. Why does that window disappear? It's something.
Hi, I'm Brett Count.
Hi. Alright, y'all. Or if you're not Southern like me, you guys. I should take care of some more important tasks. So I'll catch you guys later. But this will be finished at some point on Tuesday. So keep an eye out. have a great day, and, you know, whatever other nice shit you want to hear. See ya.